So this video is a much deeper dive into my UX design approach and toolkit. If you're looking for a brief introduction to me and my work, you can click the link in the description below for a much shorter, more succinct intro video. What I'm going to be doing in this video is going through a slide deck that I like to take new potential clients through or new teams through that I'm working with. So we can get a shared understanding of how I work and what my process is. That for me is the most important thing on a project, that we're aligned, and it's great to manage expectations around process and approach and methodology. So here we go. So I'm going to start with my best Blue Steel impersonation. I'm a UX designer, a user experience designer, and I focus mostly on enterprise software, business software, and SaaS. In a nutshell, I make complex systems and workflows intuitive, simple, and easy to use. I help companies save time and resources, creating amazing software that users love. And my projects are mostly in fintech and niche industry SaaS applications, including back office, B2B, and B2C systems, and that's across all formats. So if it's desktop, mobile, tablet, I'm format agnostic. What I like to start with here is getting a shared base understanding of what UX design is. You get a lot of people using the word UX design, often UX/UI design, all over the place. It can mean a million things. So yeah, you ask 100 people what UX design is, you'll probably get 100 different answers. And the way I like to frame UX design from my understanding and my approach is in terms of the Columbia obstruction device, which is an experiment that I think was first done in the 1930s or 1940s. If you look at the starting point of having a box, and then you've got a mouse in the box and some cheese, and that looks like a really sweet deal for the mouse until you realize that there's an electric grid in the middle separating the mouse from the cheese. And how this relates to your system and UX design is, I think of the mouse as the system's users, the cheese as what they want to get out of the system, what their outcome is, what your outcome is as well as a product, as a business, and the electric grid is the system itself, what they need to do to get the cheese. So we need to really understand what makes the mice tick. How hungry are they? How motivated are they to get the cheese? What kind of cheese do we know they like or dislike? How can we frame the cheese in a way that makes it most appealing to the mouse? And on the flip side, how can we reduce the strength and severity of the electric grid? Can we remove the electric grid as much as possible so the mouse can just get the cheese whenever it wants, no stress, and we just want to remove all friction from the system. So as you can see from that explanation, my understanding of UX design and my approach, it's very much more than the nice, flashy, appealing visual design that the user interacts with within a system at the end. It's part of it. However, there's a lot more to it. So we can't just make something attractive visually and hide a lot of structural flow, navigation, messaging issues or problems. It's just not possible. So time for a metaphor, a very overused metaphor, and actually once I started looking at the metaphor, it's actually not a very appropriate metaphor ever, because you want to avoid an iceberg. So yeah, it's great to show what's visible and what's under the surface, but yeah, we'll ignore the part of that an iceberg is actually something you want to avoid in real life. This is an iceberg you want to hit. So there's the attractive visual UI design. That's what the user can see. That's what we can see, actually. That's what the company owners can see. It's tangible, it's visible, and hopefully it's attractive and works really well. However, there is a lot under the surface that has gone into that final product, and we need to get all this stuff right. Otherwise, the final product and what the user sees is going to have problems. Another metaphor. So if you consider a building, just any kind of building. So we need to ask a lot of questions about what the building is for. Is it a hospital? Is it for traveling around in? Is it for industry? Is it for offices? Is it to live in? Whole lot of questions there. And then also, who is using the building or making use of the building or passing through the building? We need to know more about who's using it, how they want to use it, what their expectations are, and how we can design and build a building that actually meets those needs and the actual stated purpose in the beginning for the building. From there, we have questions like, how big is the building? What is the flow between rooms? Where does natural light come from? How can we design so that we can make use of natural light and it's not all gloomy? And then finally, we get to things like fittings and aesthetics. What is the look and feel of the building outside and inside, and down to the minute detail of door handles and plugs and all that. So if your software is a building, the UX designer, me, is the equivalent of the architect, not the builder. You wouldn't just go and grab a whole lot of bricks and start building a building without actually answering those questions that we just looked at in the previous slide. And the same is true for software. There's a lot of effort and resources that go into building software, more so than most buildings, actually. So we need to get it right. Otherwise, we make changes with the actual building very expensively. So if we're saying yes to UX design, we go through a UX design process and we end up with validated designs. There's a clear build scope and cost for the development team. And at the end of the day, once it's built, happy, satisfied users. So as far as I'm concerned, that is just win-win-win across the board. If we don't go with the UX design process, comes with a whole lot of risks if we just want to go straight to building the building without going through the sort of so-called architecture process. Nasty surprises are going to happen. You're going to have some unhappy users, expensive rebuilds, and release delays. So for nasty surprises, we get all sorts of nasty surprises during the UX design process, but we able to identify them and deal with them then before resources get thrown into actually building. So we're failing forward quickly and cheaply, so that by the time the really meaningful resources have to get sunk into building it, we've gotten all those out the way and we've just removed a whole lot of that risk from the build. In practice, what does this look like? 3 broad phases. First, I want to really understand, and that's both the users and the project and the context. This phase is often called an exploration phase or exploratory phase. Then we get into the actual design, and even in the design, I want to work incrementally to grapple with the foundational design decisions and challenges early on in the most efficient way possible before moving into more detail. And the more detail we design in, the slower it is, the more effort it takes, and the more and more difficult it becomes to make fundamental changes. So we really want to do whatever we can to get those fundamental decisions right early on. Then we go to validate. Then there's also what will happen is there'll be a feedback loop. So when we validate is, checking that what we've designed and what we've assumed is actually correct. And when we flag things that aren't correct or that need changing, which always happens in this phase, because we as a product team have something called the curse of knowledge, and it takes fresh eyes and real user input to actually be able to see through the curse of knowledge. And then we go back into design and resolve everything. And as I mentioned before, we can get things changed much cheaper, much faster than if we were already going to build something. And there are a whole lot of tools in my toolkit that I have to use within each of these phases. So when we're understanding, got user research and personas and storyboards, which storyboards already starts to creep into design. We're then looking at information architecture, user journeys, wireframe prototypes, and visual UI design or high fidelity design. And then when we're validating, mostly we're looking at user testing. And as I mentioned before, it's not a completely linear process, especially when it comes to the interplay between design and validate. But definitely we want to get as much understanding done before we even start to design. Okay, so that was a fairly palatable 10 minutes. For the rest of the video, I'm going into each step of my design process or toolkit in a lot more detail, and it's another 13 minutes. So if you don't have the stomach for that, that's what you're in for. Maybe you've got 13 minutes to spare. It's a nice nerdy deep dive. Enjoy it. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit more about each of the tools in my toolkit, starting from user research in the understand phase. I love doing user research. It is always fascinating. The benefits of user research is you actually talk to representative users or even real users, and you gather data that you could document and analyze and hold up to anyone who has an opinion down the line and said, this is what the users told us. This is what we gathered from the research. And it's a very powerful tool to have something tangible that has no personal flavor. My preferences, my ideas don't muddy the waters, and neither does anyone else's in the product team, because it's what's coming out of the research, not ideas that people are having. Those ideas are important within the product team, as long as they're based on what we're actually seeing and observing. A very important way and useful way of rounding out that user research, or even if we're not able to do user research, to do the best we can to develop personas based on existing knowledge of users. And the purpose of creating personas is to bring the humanity into the idea of users, so that we can make design decisions and build decisions as we go with as much empathy as possible towards real users. And we want to think of these personas as real users. They exaggerate various characteristics or traits of some types of users. And yeah, I like to refer to the personas as we then continue through the design phase and reflect, is this meeting Pfizer's needs, or this would really annoy Vui, or Elise is going to struggle with this. If we can reflect back to our personas, we are more often than not going to make much better decisions as we go ahead. And then storyboards, ideally coming out of user research, and sort of merging the user research and the actual project product feature objectives. We want to just make sure we're all on the same page around how a problem is framed that a user is faced with, and what the intended outcome is as they as they achieve the outcome through using the system. So yeah, usually I like to gather as a user stories and user research, or as a product team we do the best we can with people who have a good understanding of the users already to develop these as a user stories, and then I'll mock those up into storyboards that form the basis of the information architecture. Now we're very much in the proper design phase now, and in the next step the user journeys. User journeys and information architecture can happen simultaneously as well. They're not necessarily sequential. Information architecture, we want to get a system navigation from a user perspective that is intuitive and matches their existing mental models and their past experiences and their expectations. So see, one of these pictures is the result of a card sort. I like to facilitate a process to do a bottom-up information architecture construction rather than a top-down approach. That way we can try and get what are often very complex information architectures feel as natural as possible. User journeys look at the flow where the information architecture deals with the structure. So how are we intending users to flow through the system? And at this stage already we can flag and identify speed bumps and friction that we can remove. Where are the roadblocks happening? How can we design, even at this stage of looking at step-by-step actions through the system, how can we try and avoid the roadblocks, and how can we help users if they run into roadblocks for unforeseen reasons? And yeah, this is really where we're trying to remove friction from the system. If we go back to the mouse in the box with the cheese. Finally, usually clients breathe a sigh of relief when we get to the first wireframes. We start to actually have something resembling a screen, and usually I work with wireframes in quite a comprehensive clickable prototype. Very low on visual appeal or look and feel. I'm not interested in look and feel at this point. It's all about messaging, page structure, the hierarchy of actions and information, and available ways forward for the user. We do this without visual design because visual design adds unnecessary complexity to those design challenges that we're grappling with, and also it's just quicker and easier to do this in a low visual appeal way. So, and that's usually where the bulk of my work goes within a project, is in wireframing stage. So we want to get to wireframes and then really start to get into the details as to how screens are structured and the relationship between information on screens and the flows, and it's a way for people for the team to really engage more meaningfully with the actual content we're looking at. And at the end of the process, we get to in the building metaphor, we get to the fittings and aesthetics. So we're just not looking at any new flows or information or screens or anything. We're looking at how to take the structure and flow that we've designed and make it visually appealing, and including visual interaction effects. This is where we get to what a lot of people think of as UX design. This is very much UI visual design, or visual UI design. It's an important part of the UX design process, but as I mentioned earlier, good visual design can't cover up or compensate for bad structure and flow. Going into the validate phase, I actually prefer to do, or typically find the best time to do user testing is at wireframe stage, where we can test structure and flow before going into visual design. We're actually not that interested at this level, getting this level of feedback from users around, do they like the color? That's something that can be tested later on, or it's also different. Different users different people have different aesthetic tastes. Not all visual design is going to appeal to everyone. So, but good structural and flow design will appeal to everyone. So we want to get the level of feedback around, does the navigation make sense? And for the core actions and processes that we're looking to test, we want to get feedback from actual users through the wireframe prototypes. Is this working, and how can we improve? So I do user testing at this phase. Usually, depending on the system, 4 to 5 tests is plenty to really grapple with any improvements that need to be made. And I have never had a user test that hasn't surprised me. It is amazing what comes out of these user tests. As I mentioned, we have the curse of knowledge, and you put something in front of a user and they ask a question, why is this like this? And it's like the light bulb goes off in my brain. I'm just thinking, of course, like, how could I have not seen that? And that's why we do user testing, because of that curse of knowledge. So this validate phase, as I mentioned, not completely sequential. Usually then I'll go back to the wireframes and make the improvements or changes needed. Comes out of user testing, and then once everything's sorted, then usually visual UI design goes to the end. Something I didn't include in a previous diagram, but that is also a tool in my toolkit, are usability reviews. Usually that's often actually the first engagement I have with a system, where there's an existing system and I want to, as long as I have a decent enough understanding of a foundational understanding of the users and the intention of the system, I can review the system for usability best practices and intuitive navigation structure. So often I can, it's a much quicker and dirtier way of identifying the low-hanging fruit and identifying the highest impact or easiest changes to make without going through a full redesign. And also can be used as a basis to make a decision, does the system need a full redesign, or can we rely on certain changes to be made?